This is FightFans Radio.
Hi everybody! Welcome to another edition of Untethered MMA on FightFans Radio. It is November 29th, 2012. If you want to reach the show, a very special show today, you can reach us at 410-988-6525 on your telephone. And you can reach the three hosts on Twitter. You can reach me at It's Mike Fagan. You can reach Derek at FightLinkerSubo. And you can reach Bleacher Report extraordinaire Matt Roth at MattRoth512. Before we get into the show, how was you guys' Thanksgiving?
It was good. It was actually it was actually a really good Thanksgiving. I didn't go home to Jersey, so this was my second Thanksgiving that I've spent in Texas. The first one I did was like super depressing, where like I just went to a bar and ate like a cheeseburger, and like that's a really depressing way to spend Thanksgiving. Like that's super depressing. And then, so this year, my friends, one of our buddies bought a house, and we had, like, Friendsgiving. And so, it was a good time.
That's good.
You know, another way to, another depressing way to spend Thanksgiving is as a Cowboys fan.
Oh, dude. You know what? That was awful. That was so awful.
The best part, I on my Twitter, when it got to, like, be, like, a 3-point game, and, like, the end of the third quarter, I just said this is going to make Dallas losing so much sweeter.
And that's what actually, like, you bring up a good point, and that's actually something that, like, I hate the Cowboys because, like, they're good enough to come back. They're not
they'll teach you.
Like, but they're not good enough to win. And so it's just like, just fucking lose. Just lose, please.
No, the worst place to be as an NFL fan is when your team goes, like, 6-10 or 7-9 every year, and your owner is your GM and says he will be until he dies. That shit sucks, man. I'm sorry.
The worst is when you finish 9-7, and that's sort of like your ceiling, and you'd miss the playoffs because the other teams in your division went 10-6.
Yeah, and coming up in the draft, you're like the 18th pick. Like,
yeah, exactly.
One of the best things that happened to Denver is we hadn't gone 4-12 in like 20 years, and then we did 1 year, and we got the second overall pick, and we picked Von Miller. So sometimes you got to do that. Dallas hasn't had one of those top 5 picks in a while either. They traded up for Claiborne, but.
It's actually a worse spot in basketball when you're sort of in that middle tier every year because to get that real top flight superstar you need to get
and you're seeing it more in basketball now. You're seeing it more in basketball now, like when a team is 500 or right around there every year, like the Rockets were for a few years. They just say fuck it and blow the whole thing up.
Yeah, and football's a little easier with free agency and the way players move and stuff like that. But Derek, how was your Thanksgiving?
It was good. I ate a lot of turkey. I got pretty drunk watching football. Since then, my life has kind of sucked because I chipped a molar back in like March, and it is now decided to abscess. So 7 o'clock in the morning tomorrow, I'm going in and going like $2,000 in debt to get a root canal and a crown.
Ooh.
Oh, gross.
Ooh.
Yeah, it sucks. I could just have it pulled for a lot less money, but I have some crowding at the bottom of my teeth, so if I get it pulled, my teeth are going to resettle and fill in that spot. And then if I wanted to get it fixed later on, it would be a couple of grand extra to get like an implant. So this is my best bet, and tomorrow morning is going to be a kick in the balls.
Dude, tomorrow's going to be a kick in the balls.
Yeah,
like, the entire day. Like that's gonna that's such a shitty way to start your day. Like
I know
that's a shitty way to start your weekend.
The fuck,
you probably can't drink it all.
You can't, you can't drink it all on that, you know. And you're probably going to be told no smoking because they're going to have to like stitch you up.
Oh, I've been told that before.
Yeah, well, I mean,
they told me not to smoke after I got my wisdom teeth taken out. I was smoking while my lip was still numb. Yeah, I've played this game before.
So we're supposed to have Frank Shamrock on hopefully shortly here. We're just sort of waiting for the producer to get him on. Yeah, Frank Shamrock.
Hard times has he fallen on where he's appearing on the Untethered MMA radio show.
Well, we couldn't get his broadcast partner, Pat Miletich, so we're settling for Frank.
This is true, and I don't know Frank's political leanings, but we will find out, see if he's talked to Pat since then, how Pat's holding up, whether or not he just spent all his money on gold.
Oh man, the one. Can I be honest with you guys on air?
Yeah.
One thing I'm really worried about is how Derek's going to be with Frank Shamrock, just because Derek loves Zuffa so much.
Well, you guys can tell Frank that, and then maybe he'll have something to say to me. But I'm not going to lead in with like, so how does it feel that you'll never be in the UFC Hall of Fame? Like, I'm not going to lead in with that question.
Please don't ask that ever.
I know, but. If I ask anything, it's probably going to be towards the end. I'm going to leave this one to the people that have a future in this sport, which is clearly not me.
Well, you know, it's yeah. Speaking of which, you know, career-minded motherfuckers like Matt actually IM'd me earlier today and like said like you got to make sure Derek's not an asshole.
Oh no, this is going to be Matt is a stenographer to power, okay, and that's the accusation I fucking get. So.
No, legitimately, I started, Derek and Erica, I started writing an email today just going like, yeah, we like, Derek can't be talking, or I'm done.
Like I said, I'll save my question for the end. I hope you remember the one question that I have, but I'll let you guys go
first. While we're waiting, we can sort of start to get into UFC 154 talk. How did you guys, just overall, how was your feeling about the show?
I guess we have...
I guess we was...
So this is the radio show, huh?
I'll leave him a message. You've reached Frank Shamrock.
I thought for sure that was actually it.
God damn it! I should have kept going.
I honestly, I thought that was actually what was going to happen. Like, we were going to leave like a voicemail for him, like, "Hey Frank, it's Matt, Derek, and Michael from the Untethered radio show."
I wanted it to be like a really funny voicemail message with like 80s like lead-ins. It's like, "You've reached Frank Shamrock, former UFC champion." Strike Force commentator.
All right, so it looks like there might be a decent chance that we're not getting Frank Shamrock.
Let's talk about UFC 1 whatever.
154. Derek, how did you think about the show overall?
I loved it personally. I thought that it was a great show. I thought that it was just what was needed after a while. You finally had a main event that was the best fight on the card to me. You saw George St. Pierre get knocked down, which we haven't seen since Matt Serra did it. Really competitive main event, good mix of styles beneath it. The first estimate came out today from Meltzer, and, you know, we all know that Meltzer's numbers are not really trustworthy. When they first come out, they get adjusted a lot, even a year down the road. But it's at about 700,000, which is kind of the floor for a GSP card. And like I was saying last week, when you have a guaranteed 700,000 with George St. Pierre on the top, adding in more expensive and better fights to get it up to like 800,000 doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think the card was a success. They keep their most marketable champion. They still have the rumblings of making the Anderson Silva super fight later on. And at the same time, Johnny Hendricks has emerged as maybe the scariest fighter in the UFC.
What about you, Matthew?
Dude, Johnny Hendricks is the scariest dude, period. And I don't know if you saw this. I mean, like, yeah, the event was awesome. The main event was great. Johnny Hendricks is both of us. Like, he's the scariest dude in the UFC. But I don't know if you saw this the other day. Faraz Zahabi said it was on Bloody Elbow, and I don't know who the original source was, but Faraz Zahabi said something like, "We believe that Nick Diaz is the number one contender." Like, how? How is go fuck you? Fuck you.
I think, dude, we believe means we want, and it's an easier fight for St. Pierre.
George.
Well, they still have the rumblings last year that was the one that's really got St. Pierre up and motivated, and he really wanted to beat up Nick Diaz. So I'm sure he's holding on to that, thinks it'll be a big money fight, but that's not what's going to happen.
Well, I don't think it's so much that Diaz is an easier fight. I mean, there's certainly an argument there. But I think it's more of the fact that, one, it's a fight GSP wants, and he's made that clear. And two, it's a fight that will make him more money than fighting Johnny Hendricks. Because although Hendricks has beat a lot of top guys, a lot of good names, and beat them pretty convincingly, he's still not a guy in my eyes that people are going to want to buy to watch fight. At least on a mainstream level. And
people said the same thing about Carlos Condit. Like, what do you do to a guy at 170 to get him that rub other than have him fight George St. Pierre?
You know what? I would actually, talking about these two guys, I actually want to see Hendricks and Diaz fight. And especially if they go with the Silva St. Pierre super fight. I know Hendricks said he doesn't want to take a fight in between, but I would really love to see Hendricks and Diaz fight. I think that's
well, I would too.
Another top guy for him, and it gives him another bump, hopefully, to get him some eyes on him.
I'd be okay with that, but first, I don't like the progression argument that you're making, because when you've beaten John Fitch, you don't need to beat Nick Diaz. A, when you're on your way to a title shot. B, I don't think Diaz deserves that fight coming back. He just had a number one contenders fight, and he lost, and then George St. Pierre beat the guy that beat him legitimately. So he should fight a Josh Koscheck, he should fight a Campman, which I'm still interested in seeing that fight. He should fight somebody else, because whoever Nick Diaz fights, he's going to be getting a title shot if he wins. So why would he do it against the murder killer of the universe? Do it against somebody else.
My problem in this is, I don't know if you heard Cesar Gracie on Ariel Helwani show, but Cesar said the only two fights that make sense for Nick are GSP and Anderson Silva. Those are the only fights that we're going to take for his return fight. I hate managers and I hate this pre-fight hype. To me, the clear number one contender for in everybody's mind should be Johnny Hendricks. He's a clear guy. The winning streak of John Fitch, Josh Koscheck, and Martin Kampman. There's no better winning streak in all of MMA right now. As far as non-title holders.
Oh, yeah, there's a couple of better winning streaks in MMA.
Without a belt, there's no better winning streak right now.
We can get back to that in a second. I do want to get back to the actual event just for a moment. Personally, I thought the fight card wasn't that great up until the last two bouts, and I thought the last two bouts really made it worth it. I would have bought the pay-per-view just for those two bouts to begin with, and they ended up pretty much satisfying my expectations. I do really want to, I really think the main event, the St. Pierre Condit main event, was one of the fight of the year candidates, and there was something about that fight, even though Carlos Condit lost, and he lost in a dominating fashion outside of that third round. First of all, he was a game the entire time, which is always great to see. And there was another thing about him that I really enjoyed. It was his willingness to take risks and fight off of his back. Because so many guys are so willing to just sort of lay in guard, try to control posture, try to slow the pace down, maybe try to get the referee to stand him up. And that's when you end up with fights where guys are just sort of laying in guard and throwing punches, and it's sort of a pedestrian 5-round affair. Carlos made it an exciting fight. Even if he hadn't had that third round, and that third round looked more like one of the other 4 rounds, I still thought the fight would have been exciting, even disregarding the fact that it was a one-sided fight.
No, you're completely right. I mean, every single person that we've seen fight George St. Pierre, once they get put on their back, that's pretty much well, fuck. I'm on my back, and George St. Pierre is doing his thing. Carlos Condit, if you saw George's face after the fight, I don't know if you saw Esther's photo, but
yeah, him holding the ice pack up against his temple. Yeah, that's a brutal shot.
that's a brutal shot. And like,
yeah, I mean, I watched the post-fight press conference right afterwards, and even just watching
Now that leads me to posit: is it possible that Carlos Condit has a better MMA guard than BJ Penn?
I would say that his MMA guard, I would say that his guard is better than BJ's. BJ to me has always been a stronger top game guy. Like he's really good offensively, but his defense and working off his back, it doesn't work as well.
I think a lot of it too has to do with their styles. I mean, BJ really likes to use his body game to sweep and take guys back, and it's really tough with a guy like GSP, who's one, much bigger than him, and two, has such a tough top game. Where Carlos is much more willing to throw punches off his back. He's really good at scrambling, getting back to his feet. His length gave St. Pierre some issues. I think that if you saw Silva, if that fight ever goes down, if you saw Silva on his back, it would be sort of a similar look. Just that height disparity might see a similar look that you saw against Condit. But I don't think you can say that Penn's guard is worse than Condit's, but just based on the fighting St. Pierre.
I would say that Condit was a lot more comfortable fighting off his back, like even like throwing elbows from his back.
I'd say it was more active. I'd say that he controlled position better, and I'd say that he got passed less often. Like, how else do you judge the effectiveness of a guard?
Well, if you're judging it just strictly against GSP, against their performances, I'd agree. But
I'd say GSP would be like the meanest person to guards in the world, wouldn't you?
You cut out for a second.
I think that George St. Pierre, relative to guard, he's probably like the toughest test of one, given how often he passes, how often he's in there, and the things that he can do from it. He's probably.
I mean, my whole point is that their styles are very different from their back, and the relative weight difference plays a lot into it too. I mean, if George was a 155er, I don't think BJ would have near as much difficulty as he had in the second fight with St. Pierre.
I don't know how big Carlos Condit is at 170. I don't know how much bigger.
He's 6'2". I mean, he's a tall guy, and
right.
He's not. He doesn't strike me as a guy who's.
Hey, speaking of tall guys, can we go ahead and pour one out for Mark Hominick, because my boy Pablo Garza beat him up.
Yeah, Mark Hominick. Can we say that this has been like the worst fall from Grace?
We could say that Jose Aldo was clearly really, really sick that night in Canada.
I mean, what do you mean from fall from grace? Like,
I mean, not even fall from grace, because that's unfair to say. But like, maybe, I guess not having Sean Tompkins around is really like it's had a bigger effect than everybody actually thought.
Yeah, I didn't want to say that because it's hard. I mean, it's hard for a guy to deny, and it's hard for someone to fucking just come out and say that. But yeah, he's a different fighter since then. The Korean zombie fight was just kind of real quick. He came out too cocky and learned fast. But I think what Matt's saying with the fall from grace is when you think about guys that have won the last round of a 5-round championship fight, Mark Hominick's one of them, and it's a pretty short list. So as far as relative success for people that have done that, won the last round of a 5-round bout, especially against somebody like Jose Aldo, to then lose your next, 3 now? Or is
3.
Yeah, he's lost his next 3. And Pablo Garza, who I do love, and I think is an awesome fighter, got a number of the night awards. And I talked to him during the Broomfield card with the WEC. He's a really good guy. They put that fight together so that Mark Hominick would win, and he didn't.
It's interesting too. We've seen a couple of fights like that where guys take fights against opponents that really pose an interesting size matchup. It seems to happen a lot with taller guys. I'm trying to imagine who Jordan.
Oh, wait, sorry. It's actually a 4-fight losing streak that Hominick's been on.
Yeah, his record's not.
Wait a minute. There's Chan Sung Jung, Pablo Garza, and who am I missing?
Eddie Yagan at 145.
Oh God, yeah. And I think I was ready to pour one out at that point.
Can I just interject, Mike, before you continue?
Go
So here's the thing. Like, losing to Jose Aldo, understandable. And then losing to Chan Sung Jung in the way that he lost, like in a 7-second KO, that That's rough, dude.
It's how that happened too. It wasn't like they went forward and met and he just got caught. He fucking jumped in with his hands near his balls and got hit in the face.
Right, and then you have like the two other fights, Eddie Yagin and Pablo Garza. Those two fights were meant for him to like rebuild. Those weren't like, oh hey, we want to see like test you against other top fighters. Who the fuck is Eddie Yagin? You know,
that's another example. That's a fight that they put together because they said to Mark Hominick, like you just lost to Chan Sung Jung. Here's a rebound fight, and he lost. And that's sucks.
I think we're gonna try calling Frank again. I don't know if we're gonna do this.
I mean, go ahead. You know, it's why can't Eric call him and then be like, "Hey, what's up? Here you go. Get on the show."
We're gonna find out from Erica in the chat here.
If you want to get me to be a dick, then put me on his voicemail because that will do it.
Not how it works, bro. All right, let's call him up.
The fucking magic of technology. I don't know how Phil Donahue did it for all those years.
Matt, be prepared to say hi to him. You're starting the interview off. Matt Roth giving the abort message. All right, well, no Frank Shamrock.
Fool me once. Fool me once.
Can't get fooled again.
Shame on you.
So the question is...
he definitely asks. He says, shame on you? Can't get fooled again.
So the question is...
What's the question? You have a question?
Well, the question is, does he not have his phone on him? Or is he looking at the number and being like, I don't recognize this number?
Is he, like, on the phone and we're just getting, like, the 20 ring because it's call waiting? Because phones don't ring that much normally.
It's true.
All right, well, let's get back. Collection. If I was if Frank Shamrock was late on his mortgage, I'd be so pissed at him right
now. all two of you that tuned in to listen to Frank Shamrock, I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry. We're trying to we haven't given up yet.
No, I've given up. That is a fool me once. Shame on you.
No, we can get fooled again, though. Like, it's cool.
But fool me can't get fooled again.
You can fool me again. That's all right.
Fool me can't get fooled again.
Can't get fooled. And nobody in the crowd is like, what the fuck was that?
Wait. Apparently he ended the call, so that sounds like he's... I guess he's not coming on.
He probably Googled Untethered MMA and realized,
what am
I doing?
Damn it, I'm sorry, guys. That's probably my fault. You know what the thing is, and I was worried about this, most of our records from like Head Kick Legend and Watch Caleb Run are dead and gone now, but I think the piece that I wrote about the worst announcing trio of all time was on Cage Side Seat, so I think that's still out there.
Yeah, well. So,
it could have been fun. It could have been fun.
I prepped so hard for this, guys. You guys don't know how much work I did to get ready for this.
I read half of a book in a day.
You haven't read half a book in a year.
Dude, I haven't read a book ever.
So, coming out of UFC 154, or coming into UFC 154, not only was there a big media discussion about the super fight, but the UFC and Dana White in particular were pushing it pretty hard. Silva came up from Brazil to watch the fight. The UFC, I believe, for the first time, I mean, I could be wrong, showed reaction shots of someone at cage side during the fight, which was interesting. But now, 2 weeks later, it seems like St. Pierre is either driving a very hard bargain in terms of negotiations with the UFC, or he's trying not to get involved in the fight. He says him and his trainer both really don't want the fight at anything above 170. George is using I don't want to say excuse, but he's using the reasoning that if he moves up in weight, he feels like he has to move up for good, and it doesn't seem like he wants to do that. So, we're back. I'm back to cynicism about the thing even happening. Derek, you've been the one most pessimistic about it. What do you rate the chances are that we see this fight in 2013?
In 2013, the chances that we see this fight, I am going to have to lean. I think it's less than 50%. I think it's probably more like 30, just because they're still talking about it. And normally when they do this and they say, if the fans want it, we'll have to make it. They do that for like a day or two, and then one of the two of them is either injured or has a fight scheduled. And we're in this period now where it's been almost a week, and there's still no, impetus or change to give one of them a matchup, or for Anderson to say, I'm either going to do this or I'm not going to do that, or George St. Pierre to say, I'm not willing to do this. Normally one of those things has happened by now. It just doesn't seem like it has yet. And I think it will eventually, just because I think that, for the same reason I always have, George St. Pierre has never fought over 170. Anderson Silva is going to be 37 years old, and getting those two to come to an agreement, if George St. Pierre hasn't decided that he wants to. And here's one other thing. I was thinking about this earlier today. If St. Pierre is saying, I'll do a catchweight fight at like 178, 177, but after that, I'm not going to move back down to welterweight, then why don't you just move up to 185 and fight Anderson Silva for the belt? If you're moving up, if you say, if I take this Anderson Silva fight, I'm never going to be a welterweight again, I'm going to be a middleweight, then just be a middleweight. Why would you fight the champion in a non-title fight on your way to his weight class?
So what you're saying is, instead, in lieu of taking a 178, 179, 180 catchweight, just do the damn thing, go all the way up, fight for the title?
Yeah, and if you're worried about it, then take a fight at 185 that isn't Anderson Silva first. Go ahead.
Yeah, but, I don't think anyone can blame him for that. If that's
what if he goes to 178, beats Anderson Silva, it's a non-title fight, and then his next fight's at middleweight? Like, who is it against?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That's actually a very interesting question, because if putting on any weight to would kind of hinder his ability to get back down to 170, or he feels like it would change his body to the point where he wouldn't want to make that cut anymore. You sort of make an interesting logical question for him, because if he's going to move up in a catchweight for in a non-title bout, it puts him in a weird spot if he has to move up to welter or to middleweight completely.
The future trajectory of it doesn't make any sense, because that's the thing I always worry about with these super fights, which is what happens next. And if George St. Pierre is saying, I'm not just going to dick up 185, I'm going to leave 170, I'll advocate the title, somebody else can have it, then go ahead and do that. But a catchweight fight on your way to 185 against the champion seems really dumb.
Before I get to you, Matt, there was one interesting interview I saw with George where he said something along the lines of, I walk around 188 pounds, Anderson walks around something like 234 pounds. I don't think anyone in the world believes Anderson in any sort of shape walks around at 234. I believe Ed Soares had an interview where he said Anderson's walking around at like 210 or something around there, just sort of in preparation if this fight gets made and he has to make a bigger cut than usual. But Matt, what are the chances you think this fight happens next year?
Next year?
Yeah.
George doesn't seem like he wants to do it. Anderson seems like he wants to do it. Like, I don't think Anderson Silva wants to fight Chris Weidman, and the only fight in middleweight that I think he'll take is Michael Bisping at this point. And that's you could take that as however you want. It could be either because it's an easier fight for him because Weidman poses a wrestling risk. You can read that however you want, but I think that I think Anderson wants to fight more than GSP at this point.
Oh, I think, yeah, I don't think there's any question about that.
Like, for 100% for sure, I would say that maybe like a 30% chance.
Way to just rip off my percentage, you can't.
Did you say 32? I completely...
I said 30 on the dot, bro.
All right, then 30.5%.
Oh, so you're a little more optimistic than I am. Good for
Sorry,
you.
29.5%.
Yeah, you better $1 me.
Now, there's an interesting question I want to pose to both of you, and again, I'll go to you first, Derek, because of the nature of the question. And this wasn't really an issue before 154 because there's been talk about St. Pierre fighting Silva. I know Dana mentioned it after or before the Shields fight. but there was never the sort of promotional push for it that we saw at 154. Dana was really heavy on it. The UFC was, whenever the UFC clearly mentions stuff on the broadcast and hints at stuff, you can tell that that's what the direction that the UFC wants to go in. So the question I pose to you, and to you in particular, Derek, if the UFC can't put this fight on, if it fails to put this fight on, is that sort of invalidate everything Dana White said about the boxing model failing in terms of matchmaking?
As far as matchmaking, I think the UFC receives a lot of undue credit because we've had this discussion before about the dynamic that when a matchup is made that seems painfully obvious, it's painfully obvious, and then when a matchup is made that isn't, people shit all over it. So it's a no-win, all-lose type of situation for them. Did you bring up drug testing? Did you bring up VADA? What exactly was what were you talking about there?
I did not. I was just talking about, Dana White said for a long time that boxing can't put the fights on that the UFC can because the UFC has control of everybody. They're able to matchmake in a way that boxing can't because boxing has negotiations between fighters or between promotional entities. So does that invalidate what Dana White has said in the past? Does that mean the UFC, the model has failed?
No.
Because at this point, this is a fight that
no, it does not.
People want, and the UFC wants. This is a fight that Dana White and the UFC have come out clearly in public as saying.
Okay. Well, this gets into again the whole big unionization and future of the sport argument that I've been pushing for years. Because right now the UFC has no mechanism to force guys to take fights other than to cut them. And when you have two champions, that's not an option. So you can bribe the hell out of them, but at the end of the day, they may be more concerned with things like legacy or winning streaks or not looking bad out there than they are about the simple amount of money on the check. So I don't think that the model has failed because all that co-promotion does and all that boxing has with their multiple organizations and their multiple champions and the fucking, Golden Boy versus, the Golden Rank versus Pretty Boy Floyd, that whole war. Top rank and Golden Boy. That's what I was thinking about. That's the war that's going on. And because of that, you never see, it's either one card or it's another card. And never the two shall meet. You don't get the fight. It's another layer and another excuse for fights not being made that the UFC and mixed martial arts has eliminated by having everything under the same umbrella. It would be better for boxing if they took the UFC's model because there would be less excuses for these fights not to get made. And what you're talking about here is weight classes that are 15 pounds apart when one guy hasn't fought below 185 in 6 years and has fought at 205 a few times, and the other guy has never, ever, ever fought above 170. So it's a different deal. And it's not the death knell for the model that has brought mixed martial arts to the point that even in this piece of shit injured year, they're going to sell more pay-per-views this year than they did last year with fewer cards.
The point I'm making, and the point I'm asking or trying to get to is that Dana White and the UFC have always said that we can put matches together that fans want to see. So let's assume that in terms of Anderson Silva, people want to see in order the GSP fight, John Jones fight, and then the top middleweight guy, which is probably Chris Weidman right now. If they can't put those two fights at the top on, the Jones fight or the St. Pierre fight, I mean, how can Dana White continue to say that we put the fights on that fans want to see? Because that statement is now false if they can't put this fight on.
Well, like I said, I think maybe the fans are always going to want to see champion versus champion fights. They're going to say, if this fight gets put together, they'll be talking about how they failed to put together Anderson Silva versus John Jones. There's no fucking way you can do everything the fans want at every stage of it, and not doing so doesn't invalidate the entire idea of doing what the fans want the other 99% of time. Like I said, if you put together this fight, they're going to be bitching. They're going to say, well, and Anderson Silva kills George St. Pierre. They're going to say, well, now we want Anderson Silva versus John Jones. And if that doesn't happen, then that'll be considered a failure of the promotion. It's like the fans want the promoters to be able to dictate exactly what the fighters do, but at the same time, they want the fighters to have more freedom. Like, what the fuck? You have to pick one.
So here's something I just want to interject. So John Nash, aka Hey Not the Face, if you've ever read any of his amazing Martial Chronicles on Cage Side Seats or Bloody Elbow, You know who he is. He wants to point out that he's listening to the show and that Subbo, you are factually wrong because the UFC is 1.2 million total pay-per-view buys behind last year.
I haven't checked.
Shit.
I haven't checked, but I believe what Derek probably wanted to say was that per event, they are selling more than they were last year. I believe they're going to end up with one or two less pay-per-views than they did, fewer pay-per-views than they did in 2011. So I just want to throw that out there because the last time I checked, they were still ahead in terms of the average per pay-per-view. Now
they're having John Nash. There's your answer.
They're having a fine year. They had one George St. Pierre fight this year and 0 Brock Lesnar fights.
That's true. The other kind of angle on this fight that I wanted to get your guys' take on, and I'll go with you first, Matt, since I've been going to Derek all this time. Yep. Is the UFC? Could the UFC guarantee this fight gets put on if they sort of give St. Pierre and Silva a blank check?
I mean, shit, man.
Is there? Do you think there's an amount of money, regardless? Let's say they tell George, take this fight at 175. We'll give you $10 million guaranteed.
I think that it would be easier to do that to Anderson. Because we've seen in the past Anderson step up on short notice and and help the UFC out. Like as much of a pain in the ass as he is as a champion, and like how he only fights 2 times a year, and then he says, "Oh hey, I have injuries and blah blah blah." The guy always steps up, and he always he saves the UFC when they need him to save an event. So I think that the money thing would work more on Anderson. GSP, I don't know, dude. If the reports are correct, and he made $15 million last year, according to that was a television appearance that was in French that Ariel Helwani.
Fought one time. Did he fight one time last year?
I don't know. He said that he made $15 million last year.
No. That I believe that wasn't that interview talking about how he made $15 million in endorsements and he didn't.
Yeah.
Or was it $15 million? Because
that's crazy.
There was endorsements, and like if that
he does not make $15 million in endorsements.
Look, I'm just saying, if it's true, then I would say that that GSP is probably he's and he's not, and he's even said in interviews and stuff that he's not really fighting for money. He doesn't need money. He fights because he enjoys the sport and competition. If that's really how he feels, then you can give him a blank check and he just be like, look, I really only want to compete if I can actually compete at the highest level, and with nothing really hampering me. And if that's really the way he feels, dude, you can't. There's no amount of money for him. He needs to be what he says he needs to be, which is like however heavy he needs to be.
And if he wants to be the best 170-pound fighter in the world until he retires, nobody should give him shit for that.
Again, I've said for a long time, no one can give George shit if he doesn't want to move up or if he doesn't want to take the fight. But I do think I still think it's sort of crazy.
Well, but you'll give the promoter shit. You'll say the fucking business model has failed, but you won't blame the fighter.
Of course I give the promoter shit. The promoter's the one that has, leading into the event was basically guaranteeing that the fight was going to happen. And if they can't put it on, then they have failed on that promise.
Well, it would be a failure, but that doesn't mean the entire business model is shot. What I'm saying is you put all this.
I'm not saying the business model shot. I'm saying the matchmaking model is shot.
Well, they can't make the matches unless the fighters agree, and that's part of the deal right now with combat sports because there is no union, there are no contracts that have mechanisms for ownership to punish or force fighters to do things and for fighters to appeal and fight back and get arbitration and things like that. So it's just a one-way street right now where they pick the fights that they want to take. And when they get to a certain level, and nowadays they have enough money, which wasn't the case 5 years ago, they're not so worried about squeezing as many fights into their short athletic, window as they can. And that's a function of how much the sport has grown. It's like Matt was saying a few months ago, pay him less.
No, but honestly, looking back, am I an asshole for saying that?
you were prescient is what you were, because it really does affect, like, guys can say, you know what, I'm going to wait an extra month, and it doesn't kill them. Whereas, a few years ago, it might have.
Dude,
they might have passed on their health insurance.
I mean, shit. Remember when Rich Franklin was in that ridiculous contract that everybody was like talking about, where like he signed like a 14 fight deal or something, like some asshole deal, after that or before that Ken Shamrock fight at the first Tough finale, and like he was making like 16-16 as a champion. Do you remember that contract, or am I making this up in my head?
I mean, it's been a while. I believe you.
But he was making like he was making like he was a champion. Like he was like one of the faces of the organization, and his show and win was just awful. It looked pathetic. And then you go from that, and then now we're like champions are making millions of dollars, and like
no one's ever actually been paid $1 million according to the athletic commission.
Yeah, not show win. And there has been
not like 500 to show, 500 to win. I know that Arlovsky got over $1 million just for showing up against Fedor.
Yeah, he got 1.3, didn't he?
It was something ridiculous like that, yeah.
And Tin Sylvia made 800,000 just to show. I don't even know if there was a win bonus there. But what I'm saying is, with that, all kinds of pay is undisclosed, and I'm sure that was the case back when Rich Franklin was champion too. But
you can also see, like, where the people that are turning down fights, they're the ones that can't afford to turn them down. You know, it's not like you're
they're Czech Congo.
Yeah, or they're Czech Congo, but who knows what his financial situation is? He's been in the UFC for years, and he's probably making decent bank in France.
He's got some of the night awards as well, and remember, I mean, those are $60K a piece. That's over a year's salary to most people,
right? And so, like, I think what the big thing that has to be frustrating for Dana White in the UFC is that. Which I think it was Brett. I can't remember who brought it up, but it's that fighters are now making their own fights. Like, they're not having Joe Silva say like, "Hey, you're gonna fight this guy next." Fighters are going on the underground and they're going on Twitter and they're picking their next fight for themselves, and that has to be super frustrating because, like, even though the UFC doesn't release their own rankings, they still have like an idea of what the division looks like.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
and I think they're going to encourage some of that. They're going to encourage some of that stuff on the underground because there are beefs and stories that lead into a fight that you can't manufacture at a promotional level. So if you can say there's genuine dislike, or we weren't thinking about this fight, but these two guys came to us and said they want to fight each other, that can be a bonus as far as promotional. But I agree that it's frustrating from a matchmaking standpoint. And all these guys that talk about fighters' rights all the time, and I'm all about unionization, I'm all about them getting paid more, but what kind of veto power do you want fighters to have versus what fight they take next?
Not even that, dude. What I'm concerned about is that if a fighter, and again, they have the right, they legally have the right to turn down any fight. They can do that. They can say, look, it's not good for me. I've seen what happens when people, take short notice fights and they lose. It's just not
short notice is one thing. Short notice is one thing. I'm talking about with 3 months heads up. Should you be able to say, I don't want to fight that guy? I've seen what happens when people fight that guy, and I don't want that to happen to me.
Well, Derek, if you're suggesting that there's going to be some sort of, in a fictional union issue, if you think that the union would allow the UFC just to make matches without any sort of rights for the fighter, I think you're sorely mistaken. I don't think there's any chance.
What is any? Well, that's the question. What is any? Because it sounds like what you guys are talking about is infinite. That they can just say no, and then the promoter has to say, "All right, we'll come up with somebody else."
Well, the issue.
I think that the UFC should be. I don't know their matchmaking policy, so it's very possible this is the case and what happens. But my assumption is that Joe Silva offers a fight to people, or he says, "Hey, you have these 3 choices," or you have these 3, these people to choose.
Can you do that to champions? Could you say, "Hey, here's the number 1 contender, and here's a couple other guys in case you'd rather"?
No. The number 1 contender is the number 1 contender.
Okay, so champions can't turn down fights.
Champions should never turn down fights.
Well, should or can't? I mean, what do you want to say here?
Both.
Okay,
they should not, and and they cannot turn down fights. If you're the champion, you should be like, you know what you should be like? You should be like Crash Holly with the 24/7 rule for the hard. Like if you get off the plane and I sucker punch you and knock you out, I'm the new UFC champion.
So I can see Nick Diaz sprinting into the next George St. Pierre fight with like a Money in the Bank suitcase.
Honestly, I think a champion, you should be. If Joe Silva or it's consensus that this person is the next contender, you should not be able to say, well, no, like I think I'm gonna sit out and wait, or ooh, you know what, like I have my toe hurts. I can't fight right now. And then,
Lorenz Larkin was making fun of that with Dana White on Twitter the other day. He said, I hurt my right pinky toe. I can't fight. I wish I fought 2 years ago when people didn't pull this bullshit.
Yeah, like at that point, Lorenz Larkin's correct. Like a sprained wrist, if that's what
who are you shitting on here, Matt?
I'm not shitting on anybody. I'm saying that I agree with Lorenz Larkins, though, that if you Luke Rockhold, there's no reason for him to pull out of that fight.
That's who you're shitting on. That's what I was getting at. When you said wrist, it was,
No, but like Luke Rockhold should not pull out of that fight. The only reason why he is pulling out, in my opinion, and look, I don't know if he really is hurt. If he is, then obviously I'm incorrect, and I will admit that, up front. But dude, unless it's like a completely debilitating injury that like you can't practice, why not? Why not take that fight? Because at this point, I don't think that this final Strikeforce event ever happens.
Well, I mean, they did actually find an opponent for Pat Healy today. Jorge Masvidal did step in, so they're at least going through the motions that they're going to put on the card.
I mean, in my mind, you have a better shot at getting another WEC card than you would with getting a final Strikeforce fight.
The issue that the UFC has with filling in short notice fights, and potentially in the future with just getting guys to fight who they want, is the economics of the sport, the economic landscape of the sport is changing, where especially guys at the top you're seeing who are making a lot of money have a lot more leverage, and they don't have to, this kind of goes to what Matt was saying about paying guys less, which I think is an insane thing to say, but when they're making more money, they have more leverage. They don't have to take a fight in 2 weeks or 4 weeks or a month. So for the UFC, if they want guys to take fights on short notice, or if they want guys to, fight certain guys that they want, they're going to have to start paying more. They're going to have to start offering the compensation to the guy to take that risk. A guy like Chet Congo, I don't remember who they were trying to get him to fight.
No, Roy Nelson.
Roy Nelson. But if they want him to fight Roy Nelson on short notice, they're going to have to compensate him for the risk he's taking to his career. Because he's in a point now, he's 17 fights into his UFC career.
37 years old.
37 years old, and he's 3-1 in his last 4 fights. He's got a pretty decent record. He's beaten some pretty, not great heavyweights, but a nice line of middle-tier heavyweights. He lost to Mark Hunt at UFC 144. He's at risk at this point of, if he loses a fight in bad fashion, or if he loses a couple fights in bad fashion, they might cut him. And he has a limited window to, make money from this fighting thing. So if they want him to take the risk of fighting Roy Nelson, who's a top 10 or a fringe top 10 guy, they're going to have to pay him to accept the risk of taking that fight. And until they start doing that, Dana White just comes off as a petulant baby about it, because he wants what he had 5 years ago, but he wants that with the current success that not only he is having, but the rest of his fighters are having.
I think what's going to be interesting is the way that the UFC is going to respond to it, and I mean that in that let's be honest, they could now go to anybody who turns down a fight. We're just going to cut you after a loss. Like if you take a loss.
The issue with that though is that they're going to hurt their own integrity. They can't start. Even a guy like Chet Congo, who's sort of a mid-tier heavyweight, he's still a top 20 easily heavyweight. They can't keep cutting guys at that level, especially at heavyweight where the talent pool is so thin. They can't keep cutting guys at that level, and just because they turn down fights, and then expect people to buy into the fact that this is the major league of MMA. And then you're providing an opportunity for someone else, to fill the role that Strikeforce had a couple years ago as a second tier promotion.
Well, they're dead now, and they're not going to be a second tier promotion.
Well, not obviously Strikeforce isn't, but I mean, every time we've seen the number 2 promotion get knocked off, someone else has been there to kind of take the spot. I don't think Bellator is at the same level that Strikeforce was when the UFC bought them, but they're at a pretty decent level in terms of where they're at nationally. I don't think they're a great promotion by any means, but if you start putting more talent into the free agent pool that Bellator can sign, they're gonna, that's going to strengthen them as a promotion.
I'm not worried.
Both of you with logic.
I don't worry about their strength. I don't give a shit. I don't worry about their strength as a promotion. I don't give a fuck.
Right, I know, I understand that. I'm just saying that there's, the fighters have leverage now. That all points goes back to that. The fighters still have leverage. When they're making this much money, they're not in a position where they need to be taking these fights anymore, and it's an issue that the UFC is going to have to deal with. And it's they're not going to be able to handle it by cutting guys. They're not going to be able to handle it by calling them out in public.
No, what they're going to handle it by is just by making dickish contracts that say you get turned down one fight, and then after that, we're going to fucking dock your pay. And then if people don't sign it, they can go to Bellator. And that's going to be their only enforcement mechanism short of collective bargaining with the union.
I think if the UFC started inserting clauses like that, you would see a lot more guys heading to Bellator. Because I don't think a fighter wants to be in a position where they have no control over their career. I do want to move on. We only have a few minutes left here before the top of the hour. Derek, you were talking about the Fighters Union, something that you've been kind of an advocate for. And, with the recent passing of Marvin Miller, who was sort of the influential force in labor negotiations in all professional sports, Dana White had an interview, it looks like with MMA Weekly. I want to read you guys a quote. The thing about fighting is not a team sport. It's an individual sport. It's going to be tough to see a day when Anderson Silva or GSP is giving up big chunks of their money to guys who won't make 2 fights in the UFC. So that's sort of always been the talking point against a union, not necessarily against why it should happen, but the fact that it is hard to imagine the guys at the top wanting to cut some of their pay to help out the rest of the guys. And that's sort of the reason you've never seen a union materialize in professional wrestling with the WWE. A guy like LeBron James in basketball is sacrificing many, many millions of dollars by collectively bargaining with the NBA, allowing a salary cap, and allowing max contracts. If he was being paid on a pure free agent market, he would be making twice as much as he is right now, just on base salary. So I just want to ask, Derek, if you need the cooperation of the guys at the top to even make this idea even close to a reality, I mean, how is that going to get reconciled?
Because as you said, LeBron James is being he's at a severe disadvantage by being unionized, because he could probably make $100 million a year if there was no salary cap, because some city would deem him worthy of that and say he's going to make us that much money plus some. But there still is a basketball players union, and the pro wrestling union was essentially stopped by paying the top guys like Hogan and others such an astronomical amount that it was in their best interest not to. But that's been the case in every other sport. In baseball, Carl Yastrzemski basically ran around to the owners saying, you know what, fuck the union, I'll play. You can just pay me whatever you want and give me 8 other guys and we'll be okay. But pro wrestling was a lot easier because it's not a team sport. The other team sports took almost a century after being originally organized to unionize. So when you look at it through that prism, it's, MMA has a long ways to go timeline-wise before you can really expect them relative to the other sports to achieve full unionization and collective bargaining and everything. But between the training partners and the sizes of the gyms now, you're not just having gyms where all the fighters there make $500,000 a year or more. Normally, you have 1 or 2 of those guys there per gym, and then everybody else is there to help them and put them through the paces. And in exchange, they get better as a result. But if those guys aren't getting paid dick, and if those guys don't have health insurance, then it's hard for you to maintain a good training camp and good relations with those guys. In MMA, I'm optimistic about the future of the union. I think it's possible, and I think that it's necessary, and it's not something that can be handed down by ownership. It's incumbent upon the fighters to take charge.
Here's what's always bothered me about the whole union talk, and maybe why I've always been against the fighters union. I've just never heard like a good real pitch or really good explanation on the fact that you have fighters that if you enter the UFC, like, but you're like on like a short notice fight, like a guy, take a guy like Eddie Yagin, like, does he get the same protection and bonuses and minimum salary cap as somebody who who's maybe worked his way up through the organization, like or does it apply to all of MMA where all these regional promotions are going to need to pay this minimum salary, or is it strictly a UFC fighters union? If that case, then it doesn't make sense on the other hand, because the UFC has how many people under contract? 450.
Well, I imagine
like think about that. Like, there's 450 fighters in the UFC, and if you're equating their revenue, they're basically the New York Yankees. How many people on the Yankees? 22.
25. Well,
25?
on the active 25-man roster.
25 people, 25 men on the active roster, and that's why the Yankees have like this crazy ass what's called like this crazy ass salary.
Do you think the UFC spends $180 million a year on fighter pay?
Between pay-per-view bonuses and like discretionary bonuses and 470 people? Yeah, I'd say it's probably that's possible.
Okay, well, think about it. If it's 30 events a year between free TV and pay-per-view, then you're talking about $5 million a show for fighter pay. That's ludicrous, Matt.
You know how much money Rashad Evans made alone on that Rampage Jackson fight?
A couple million?
$5 million.
$5 million. Okay, so you have $175 million left to
account. But you said $5 million. That's ludicrous. That's one guy. Rampage got that same bonus.
Mike,
Rampage got that same bonus. That's $10 million plus the entire rest of the show.
Mike, help me out here. $180 million for the UFC to spend on fighters in a year in pay.
I will. We got to get out of here, guys. It's the top of the hour. I got stuff to do.
$180 million.
Well, I want to say this. I ran the numbers at one point. Because typically in the major pro sports in America, they pay the athletes about 50%, plus or minus a few percentage points. In MMA and the UFC, just strictly based on what the commissions report, it's only about 10 to 15%. So for them to get to that 50% mark would be a lot of pay-per-view bonus and locker room bonus. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but it would be a lot of money that they're paying, sort of quote unquote, under the table.
Lorenzo Fertitta has gone on record saying that it's basically the same as every other major league sport.
$250 million for 6 years. 256.